Internet discourse has been a thing for ages now. Everyone likes to discuss a variety of topics with the people around them, especially in the gaming landscape. Usually this results in either pleasant exchanges and debates over certain things they may like or dislike in a game, or mindless screaming contests over who's right and who's the less irritating of the two. We've all been there plenty of times, and we've also been part of a different phenomenon called the popular opinion. Basically, when a game or any product comes out, the majority of people who experience it come to relatively the same opinion and generally agree on the quality of the product, good or bad. But then you have those who dare to disagree, those few who had a different experience compared to the pack and have a different outlook on the game as a result. And said outlook more than likely ruffles the feathers of the majority of people who experience the game. This is what's called an unpopular opinion, or hot take if you will. And even if your opinions tend to align with the crowd more often than not, there is always that one game that gives a different feeling. Personally, this phenomenon has happened to me quite a bit, and over the years, I've gathered quite a few hot takes regarding some games or even just certain aspects of games. Now, I have touched upon this topic somewhat through the remakes I like but no one else does video, but this time it'll be more general with a wider range of aspects and games to discuss. I've got 10 here to show in no particular order, and I hope the reactions from these are at least interesting. With that said, let's start off with the tamer one. At least in terms of opinion. Outlast 2 is better than Outlast 1. For the uninitiated, the Outlast games are a couple of indie horror games that are very iconic in the horror landscape. Outlast 1 takes place in an insane asylum overrun by mutated inmates, and Outlast 2 takes place in an isolated village run by an insane cult. There's also the Outlast Trials, which is a multiplayer game set before Outlast 1, but that's not important. What is the reputation of these games. The first game is widely praised as one of the best horror games to this day, with only a handful of detractors. Meanwhile, the second game is kinda just treated as the other one. Like, it's not hated by any means, a ton of people really like it, in fact. It's just that people felt it missed the mark in a few areas that prevent it from being better or even as good as the original in their eyes. Well, as much as I love Outlast 1 as much as the next guy, I'm one of the rare few that finds Outlast 2 to be the better of the duology, for a few reasons. First one being, this game looks really good. Outlast 1 still holds up in a lot of areas despite being 10 years old and apparently being made in only 14 months, but I don't think anyone will argue that Outlast 2 doesn't look better in every way. A part of that is due to the superior hardware, sure, but it's still commendable. Everything just feels enhanced, from the textures to the animations to the atmosphere. Speaking of which, this game is just as, if not more terrifying than the first game. The grungy, oppressive atmosphere coupled with the brilliant score and creepy enemy designs that get more and more twisted the further you go really makes this game consistently scary throughout, saying nothing of the school sections of the game. Those parts have always managed to scare me every time I play the game. Seriously, I have never been more terrified of a French horn in my life. Another aspect that doesn't get nearly enough praise is the stalker enemies of the game. Everyone loves Chris Walker and the Wall Rider from Outlast 1, and for good reason, but there's not nearly enough love for Marta and Father Loudermilch. They may serve similar roles as the former, but they both succeed in their own ways. Marta is not only more hateable due to her actions in the story, but she can also be really unnerving during her parts of the game, especially when she's just ominously staring at you from a distance. As for Father Loudermilch, he not only has some really disturbing lore surrounding him, but he's also got the best chase sequences in the game, especially in the library. Also, he's got a way better design than the Wall Rider. Don't get me wrong, the Wall Rider's cool and all, but it's literally just a transparent floating human at the end of the day. This guy is a literal demon, in more ways than one. I won't deny that Outlast 2 has issues, namely the wider story could have been conveyed a lot better, and I'm not really sold on small gameplay tweaks like the limited stamina. However, when you learn more about the wider story go on, the rest of my complaints become little more than nitpicks that don't affect my enjoyment of the game. I still really enjoy Outlast 1, but if you had to make me choose between them, I'm picking Outlast 2 more often than not. Alright, now that we've gotten that one out of the way, how about we turn up the heat a little bit with a popular character that I don't really see the hype for. No, not that one. Not that one. There we go. Bandana Waddle Dee is kind of overrated. Now, I know this little guy has his fair share of fans, and to be fair, I don't even dislike him that much. I just don't understand why his fans hype him up so much. I mean, he's literally just a normal Waddle Dee with a spear and bandana. That's it. Anyone can wield a spear, that doesn't automatically make them special. Sure, he's kind of fun to play as, but compared to King Dedede, Meta Knight, and most of Kirby's copy abilities, he's probably the weakest character to play as. Heck, in Kirby's Return to Dreamland, the spear ability literally gives you all the abilities Bandana Waddle Dee does, so why even bother playing as him? Okay, so he's not that useful or uniquely designed. Is his character at least interesting? Well, I would answer that if he had one to begin with. His only contribution in Return to Dreamland is being another hero, and he's literally just a less cool Player 2 character in Forgotten Land. No real personality, just a blank slate. Again, I don't hate or even dislike the guy, as I do get some mild enjoyment from playing as him, but I just don't understand why he's so beloved amongst fans. He's so boring from a character and design perspective, his abilities are redundant, and he definitely doesn't deserve to be in Smash Bros. Keep him on the bench with the others, it's where he belongs. And while on the subject of boring, useless side characters, let's jump over to a different Nintendo franchise and make fun of a monkey. Cranky Kong is the most useless Kong out of the bunch. Okay, maybe this one isn't that hot of a take considering I haven't seen very many fans of Old Monkey Cranky, but I also haven't seen anyone actively complain about him either. That might be because he's not really worth it, but I'm gonna do it anyway. Like Bandana Waddle Dee, I don't hate or dislike Cranky that much. I just think he's pretty useless, all things considered. His backstory of being the original Donkey Kong from the old arcade game is pretty neat, but the roles he serves in the actual games make me question why he's still around. As a shopkeeper, he's just kinda there to sell you stuff and occasionally yell at you like the cranky old bat that he is, and as a playable character, he pales in comparison to Diddy and Dixie Kong. His gimmick is that he can use his cane like a pogo stick, and you're immune to spikes when you do it. That sounds neat, but compared to Diddy's jetpack and Dixie's propeller hair, I don't find much reason to choose Cranky over those two, outside of one or two instances where it's required for a collectible. I would say keep him in the shop where he belongs, but Funky filled that void in Tropical Freeze with a lot more style. So again, why keep Cranky around? I never want to play as him, and all he does when he isn't playable is yell like an old man. He's just taking up space, and it's high time the monkey moved out. Alright, enough stalling. It's time we pulled out a classic hot take that quite a few people seem to have, and I'm no exception. Metroid Other M isn't that bad. Now, to get the obvious stuff out of the way, I understand people's complaints with this game. I get why people don't like the story that much, and why people get so mad over it, even though I think a lot of it is overblown. There are quite a few problems with this game, and I will never deny that. But I also won't stand by the people who say that there's nothing good about it either. For one, this game looks pretty good for the time. Before Metroid Dread, the environments were some of the prettiest you could find in the franchise, with brilliant atmospheres in each one. The combat is some of the flashiest and fast-paced we've seen from this franchise, and it actually shows off just how much of a badass Samus can be. People can harp on the D-pad controls and having to switch to first person to use missiles, but neither of those really bother me. Sure, sometimes it could be a little clunky, but those moments weren't very often in my experience. The music for this game is also good. It sets just the right mood for the situation at hand, and of course, Ridley's theme exists. I think that's the one element of the game that's universally loved by the fanbase. Heck, even the story has some elements that I like. The whole mystery of which member of Adam's force is a traitor is compelling, if not paid off well at all. The Ridley scene, with some reworking, could have actually been a really effective moment for Samus. The idea of Mother Brain living on through an android is genuinely cool and should have been expanded on more. And come on, you will never get me to hate Anthony Higgs, the absolute best character in Metroid that isn't Samus herself. He is to this game what Glamrock Freddy is to FNAF Security Breach. If you know, you know. There's always a chance that some of this is coming from a place of nostalgia, since, as much as I hate to admit it, this was my first Metroid game. But even after seeing this game from multiple perspectives, I still can't say I hate or even dislike it, nearly on the same level as most of the fanbase. I still have quite a bit of fun with it, despite all the criticism I've heard. And I would go so far as to say that despite all its problems, it's not the worst Metroid game for me. That prize goes to the original. Hey, what's wrong with the original Metroid? Oh, just everything. You got no clear sense of direction, the rate of item pickups makes your chances of winning the lottery blush, everywhere looks the same visually, and Zero Mission practically replaced it in every way. You can at least get some cool things out of Other M. There's literally no reason to play the original Metroid other than the novelty, I guess. But anyways, these takes have been tepid for far too long. We need something spicy, something to really make people rage like the Red Hulk. And I have just a thing from just the right fanbase. Jet the Hawk is Sonic's worst rival. And with that, I've officially made a few enemies because people really love the Riders series. Well, two of them anyway. Now those who've been with me for a while would know that I'm not particularly fond of Sonic Riders. The first one can be enjoyable if you can get past the complete lack of a tutorial, the second one is actually fun, and the third is the worst Sonic game in existence. Not the best track record, unfortunately, but one of the things people do love about this Sonic sub-series is the Babylon Rogues, and especially their leader, Jet the Hawk. However, not only am I not fond of Jet or his band of cronies, but I also think he's the worst rival Sonic has ever had, assuming you don't count Fang the Hunter. Jet to me is as basic of a rival as you could have. He has only two goals in life, being the fastest thing alive, on a hoverboard anyway, and nab any treasure he can find as well. So he's basically just a bad version of Sonic with some of Rouge's treasure tendencies. That's really boring, and it's basically all you get with him and his goons. Compare this to Metal Sonic, the robot literally made to surpass Sonic in every way, yet can never defeat him no matter what he does. Or Shadow, the ultimate life form who's basically Sonic's polar opposite in many ways that are far more interesting. Even Knuckles during his brief tenure as Sonic's rival had more interesting parallels. Red versus Blue, Strength versus Speed, Duty versus Freedom, and all that. Meanwhile, Jet is just Sonic the Hedgehog if he was green, bad, and rode a hoverboard to be fast. He's as basic as a rival can be, and they've never tried to give him anything else to work with. Heck, in the Archie comics, we literally got a version of Sonic that was also green and bad, and he's way more interesting and compelling of a rival and a character. Jet and his cronies may be making their grand return in Sonic Racing Cross Worlds, but personally, if they had never mentioned them again, you wouldn't see me complaining. Alright, what's next on the list? Ooh, a Zelda hot take! I wonder what it could be. We need the old era of Zelda back. Now, before you grab your torches and pitchforks, let me preface this by saying that I really like Breath of the Wild. It's one of my favorite entries in the franchise for good reason, and while I haven't played Tears of the Kingdom, it seems like it's made a ton of fans happy, which I'm glad to see. However, I don't think that these two games should be the status quo for the foreseeable future for a number of reasons. To start off, these games are massive. They take hours and hours on end just to finish the main quests, never mind going all the way to 100% like I did for some reason with Breath of the Wild. Of course, this isn't inherently a bad thing. Longer games can still be great games, but when you get multiple longer games every few years, it can start to feel draining. I don't know anyone who isn't a die-hard Zelda fan that would fully commit to playing these giant open world games all the way through. Most people would probably only play through some of it and drop it after a while. Second of all, Nintendo seems a little too keen on jumping on the Breath of the Wild train, to the point where they started milking it as much as they can over the past few years. After the first game was such a hit, they immediately gave it 2 DLC packs. They added Breath of the Wild Link to Mario Kart 8 Deluxe alongside the classic version. Breath of the Wild Link is the version repping Link in Smash Bros. They released a Warriors spin-off not too long afterwards and gave that DLC, and they semi-recently released the first Zelda game to be a direct sequel to a previous game since Phantom Hourglass. At least the Link Between Worlds was set some 100-odd years after A Link to the Past. Like, calm down a little bit. Don't you think you're being a little overzealous with all this? On some level, I get it. Breath of the Wild was lightning in a bottle, and you want to capitalize on it. But to immediately inundate us with all sorts of Breath of the Wild-related content and promotion is borderline suffocating. And if that wasn't bad enough, they've yet to properly translate the Zelda formula to this new open world style of gameplay. Talk to most Zelda fans, and the most common critique of Breath of the Wild is how lacking both the dungeons and the bosses are, save for like one of each. I have heard that Tears of the Kingdom does a little better in that regard, but it's still not great or anything. Obviously, you would expect some hurdles from the first attempt at a new style of gameplay, but when you still can't get it right on the second go, that doesn't bode well for the future of this new series. Lastly, and I hate to sound old-fashioned, but I miss how it feels to play the older Zelda games. I miss exploring big, complex dungeons, collecting major items that help you navigate said dungeons, and fighting cool bosses that involve using the item you got in an engaging way. Given how Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom are designed to be as open as possible, stuff like this is almost impossible to manage successfully. Some of you might say we still have the old Zelda thanks to the remasters and 2D Zelda games, but that's not a good alternative for me. As someone who greatly prefers 3D Zelda over 2D Zelda, I don't want the classic gameplay to be exclusive to the format I like less, and I especially don't want to live in a timeline where the only taste of classic Zelda we get is from rehashes of previous games. Obviously, Nintendo is going to keep making these massive open world Zelda games, but there's nothing wrong with giving us the classic Zelda formula in between all that. Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom may have been great, but I for one yearn for the older stuff. Give us a brand new game that plays like the older games, and as long as it's fun and made to the standards you set, it's gonna sell like hotcakes. I guarantee it. And since we're talking about a big corporation like Nintendo, we might as well shift over to another one of the big leagues and call attention to their biggest problem. Sony games should stop trying to be movies. This one might not be that much of a hot take considering it's something people have been noticing more and more, especially in recent years, but it also hasn't been talked about in a negative context save for a handful of people. Well, add me to that handful because I think Sony's way of making games is inherently flawed and should be reworked. For those who aren't aware, Sony has basically become Nintendo's opposite in terms of priorities with their games. While Nintendo favors making fun, polished games over making stories, Sony hyperfixates on the story and presentation of their games, while the actual gameplay can feel undercooked at points. This has been present in all sorts of Sony games like The Last of Us, Horizon, God of War, and even parts of Uncharted. You might think that's not too bad since these games are still loved, but there's a reason people have complaints about them to begin with. Let's look at the prime example of this conundrum, The Last of Us. The story is very clearly the focal point. The game is beautiful, the writing is top-notch in one game, the voice performances are excellent, and the cinematography is well done. But what about the actual gameplay? Well, outside of an occasional shootout with survivors and the occasional clicker stealth section, a good chunk of the game is just walking from point A to point B. Sure, you can forage for supplies and all that, but it's hard to take in any ambiance or atmosphere when the characters are yapping almost non-stop the whole way. If it was just a few instances of this, then fine. It's a little unfortunate, but tolerable. But there are as many of these walking sequences as there are combat and stealth encounters, maybe more in The Last of Us 2's case. Now apply this viewpoint to Horizon and God of War, and you'll get a similar result. Good stories with great writing and cinematography, but the gameplay is only half fun combat sequences while the other half is running from point A to point B for a good 5 to 10 minutes. Not to mention the constant hand-holding over the puzzles. Whenever you enter any sort of puzzle that requires some thought, you get like a minute max before your talkative sidekick practically spells out the answer for you. We're not children, and even if we were, kids are smarter than you think. At least give us a little bit more to solve it ourselves first, then you could drop a not-so-obvious hint. Of course, this doesn't apply to every Sony game under the sun. Uncharted suffers from this kind of thing the least, even though it does still happen from time to time. Astrobot is practically all gameplay and no story, and Stellar Blade actually strikes a good balance between story and gameplay. But the big releases that tend to get all the push from Sony and get all the awards, whether they deserve it or not, all follow the same formula. Maybe it was novel back when The Last of Us did it, but nowadays it's repetitive. Every major Sony release looks and feels the same these days, and I think they should really look at what they've accomplished with games like Astrobot and Stellar Blade and start applying it to their other IPs. You guys aren't Telltale after all, you can balance things out way better than you do. Continue to deliver great stories, of course, but try to put more focus on the gameplay as well. Don't make it just a walking sim with the occasional combat sequence. Flesh it out more with more interesting stuff to do. And especially stop treating your audience like they're toddlers that can't solve a 6-piece puzzle without their parents. Just make things more balanced and I promise you'll only see success. You've had games that proved it before, so there's no reason not to. With that said, let's cool our tongues with a not-so-hot take that I can only imagine the RPG crowd disagreeing with. And that is... King Boo is a better villain than Bowser. I mean, can you really disagree? Sure, if you're just looking at his sparse appearances in the mainline Mario games, you might not get it. But the Luigi's Mansion series gave this ghost so much of a glow-up and made him Luigi's perfect foil. Sorry, Waluigi. Compared to Bowser's generally goofy but occasionally serious attitude, King Boo is all business. He doesn't have soft spots for anything. He won't team up with Luigi to defeat a common enemy. This guy is pure evil through and through, and is rarely portrayed in a goofy sense. At least in the Luigi's Mansion games. The mainline Mario games just kind of have him be a slightly more special Boo with a crown, but who cares about him there? King Boo is also one of the most dangerous villains we've seen in Mario. He's automatically superior to Bowser through just capturing Mario, but he gets more dangerous thanks to his army of ghosts. In Luigi's Mansion 2, he sent so many ghosts from the Ghost Dimension into the main world that it almost ripped apart the fabric of reality, and in the same game within the Ghost Dimension, he was practically a reality warper with all the crazy stuff he did. Heck, in Luigi's Mansion 3, he not only captures Mario, Peach, Egad, and several Toads, but during the final boss, he gets so desperate to beat Luigi that he attempts to trap the entire hotel in a gigantic painting. Couple that with some legitimately unsettling moments from him, and yeah, it's really no contest for me who's the superior Mario villain. Again, this probably isn't that hot of a take. There are a ton of King Boo fans out there, but I still think it counts considering how many people like Bowser, especially in the RPGs, and how little people actually compare the two big bads. Now, I still like Bowser as much as the next guy, but if you ask me who is better, I'll pick the Ghost King over the Koopa King any day of the week. You know what we need right now? A classic hot take. one that's brought up several times by some members of a certain fandom, and one that's bound to ruffle some feathers every time. And for me specifically, it's one that I feel particularly defensive about, given how said fandom acts whenever I say it. Say it with me, folks. Resident Evil 3 Remake is a good game. Yes, sir, we're back to this old game, the one mainline Resident Evil game almost nobody likes. Hell, I'm pretty sure there are more fans of Resident Evil 6 than this game, which is baffling because despite all the whining and crying and fear-mongering over future remakes, I still believe this game is good, all things considered. I mean, first of all, this is a gorgeous game. I know people will write that part off just because it uses the same style as Resident Evil 2 Remake, but to be blunt, those people are stupid. Just because two games share similar assets and art style doesn't mean that one is less beautiful than the other. That's like saying Zelda Majora's Mask is a worse looking game than Ocarina of Time just because it borrows the assets and art style of that game. It's a stupid complaint and only serves as a sorry excuse for people who hate the remake to arbitrarily hate it even more. But moving away from that, there are plenty of good things about this game too, like the improved characters from the original. Jill's a badass survivor with a bit of a soft side, Brad actually pulls his weight for once instead of being pathetic cannon fodder, Carlos went from a cringe-inducing incel with horrible voice acting to a lovable yet loyal soldier, and Nikolai is a pretty good villain, if a little over the top. Even then, I don't think I can call that a complaint, considering this franchise is no stranger to over-the-top villains. Speaking of which, Nemesis is very different here than in the original, and while 90% of fans hate what they did with him, I firmly like how he is. Sure, he's not like Mr. X in everyone's precious RE2 remake, but that doesn't mean he's bad. I, for one, find him quite intimidating with how persistent and unkillable he is throughout the story, and his boss fights are undoubtedly the highlight of the game and really keep you on your toes. And no, the whole cut content and too short complaints don't bother me either. First of all, basically every Resident Evil game can be beaten in just a few hours, even both versions of Resident Evil 4. And second of all, when the cut content just amounted to areas that only take like 10 minutes to beat, and lots of extra choices that don't change the story in the slightest, I don't find it worth complaining about. What's more is that people still have a double standard when it comes to cutting content. When they dumb down the A-B scenarios for their RE2 remake, hardly anyone complained at all. But when they cut just a few areas from RE3, you evil sons of shit, I hope you die! Yeah, totally justified responses there. You people really can't be pleased with remakes. If the people behind them change even one thing about the original, you whine and cry. But if they give you pretty much the exact same experience as the original, you also whine and cry. I guess the real solution is just no remakes ever. No attempts to look back on the past and see what we could do better. Everything's perfect the way it is when it first released, apparently. I know I'm coming across as quite a bit harsher with this entry than the others, but while I am, I also feel like I need to be with this game. As I mentioned before, the fanbase is extremely volatile towards this game and anyone who dares to say they enjoy it. According to them, you're not allowed to like it. You need to hate it just like they did, or else you're basically an outcast. A fake fan, if you will, which is ridiculous. Nobody is going to agree with you on absolutely everything, and trying to make them paint you as an entitled prick. You have no right to say what games people can and can't like. I have almost never shamed anyone for liking a game I hate. I disagreed with them before, but with the sole exception of Garten of Banban, I wouldn't immediately think to shame someone for liking a game I hate. Just let people like what they like and hate what they hate. It doesn't hurt you to do that, so do it. It's not that hard. Okay, now we're down to the final hot take of the video, and I think I've saved the spiciest for last, which would be impressive considering what I just got done with. If by some miracle none of the other hot takes sparked any outrage or discussion, this one most definitely will. So, without further ado, my final and hottest take of the video is... we don't need a Super Smash Bros. 6. Ever since the Switch 2 was finally unveiled, I have seen a bunch of videos talking about what the next Smash Bros. Game could be. Everyone's assuming that in a year or two from the Switch 2's release, we're going to get another Smash Bros. Entry, or at least an advanced port of Ultimate. But I don't think we should have either of those, to be frank. In fact, I think Super Smash Bros. Deserves to end with Ultimate as the last one, for so many reasons. The first of which being, what is there to improve? The gameplay of Smash Bros. Has been so refined over the years that I don't know what kind of gameplay changes you could make after Ultimate. Ultimate. At best, you could maybe tweak a couple of the final smashes or add some new items, but that's not worth making a whole new game over. As for the other modes, there's not much you could do with those either. Granted, a few of them weren't in Ultimate when it first released, but even before the first wave of DLC, they were all present and accounted for and worked wonderfully. So you can't really improve upon the base gameplay anymore, and attempting to fix what isn't broken is just gonna end up breaking it. Of course, the immediate response to this is gonna be, they need to improve the story! We need Subspace Emissary too! But that leads to my second point. Who plays Smash Bros for the story? There are so many universes with radically different tones in this series that the in-universe explanation for them crossing over is that they're a bunch of toys, and the matches and miscellaneous adventures that the characters get involved in are just from the imagination of the kid playing with them. Nothing within Smash Bros has and ever will be canon to any of these series, with the highly debatable exception of Kid Icarus. So making a story that balances out all of them is an impossibility. Also, for those of you who are about to type in the comments that I'm wrong because of Subspace Emissary, the only reason anyone thinks Subspace is a good story is either childhood nostalgia or they just turn their brain off. Because when you actually look at what happens in Subspace, you quickly realize that the actual plot is completely scattered and nobody has any real motivation for what they're doing. For as much complaining as people do over the lack of cutscenes in World of Light, that was probably for the best considering the inherent flaws on making a real good story with all of these characters. Then there's the third reason I think we don't need a 6th Smash Bros. The character roster. There are almost 100 different fighters present in Ultimate, most of which return from all over the series' history, with a handful of new entries. And I think people seriously overlook the fact that if a Smash 6 were to happen, not all of these guys are coming back. Even beyond the 2 waves of DLC fighters, which are pretty much guaranteed to be left out, I think it's safe to say that a good majority of the base characters present won't be featured in a Smash 6. Not just the ones that people hate or don't care about, but also some fan favorites too, just so there's as much room as possible for newcomers. This isn't anything new either. From Smash Brawl to Smash 4, characters like Snake, Wolf, 2 Pokemon, and their trainer didn't make it in, with Lucas only getting in as DLC. And speaking of DLC, I'm pretty confident in saying that Ryu, Corrin, Cloud, and Bayonetta probably wouldn't have made it into Ultimate if not for the "Everyone is Here" tagline. Hell, some of the characters from Melee like Pichu, Young Link, and Roy didn't even make it into Brawl, much less Smash 4, not counting DLC. So it's wishful thinking at best to assume that everyone from Ultimate is just guaranteed to be in the next game, if there is one. Lastly, my final reason for not wanting a Smash 6 is, it feels right to end with Ultimate. I mean, the whole premise of bringing back every character that's ever been in a Smash Bros. Game for one last round was already a telltale sign, but then you have so many historic moments from this game that could never be replicated. Ridley and King K. Rool getting in after years of fans requesting them, Banjo and Kazooie getting some kind of return after over a decade of being dead, the reveal of Sans getting in as a Mii costume, and of course, ending the DLC with Sora. Even the way World of Light ends with all the spirits going home as that beautiful main theme plays paints the clear picture that this game is where it ends. So having another game after everything we got from Ultimate would be tacky at best. Believe me, I would love to have some new characters to play as in Smash Bros, but the cost of getting them in a new game or even just a port of Ultimate isn't worth it in my opinion. The stars aligned perfectly for Ultimate to be the final Smash Bros game, and it should be the final Smash Bros game. Don't keep it going purely for money's sake. Let it die with honor, knowing it went out in a blaze of glory. There's only so far anything can go before it just has to stop. Finally at the end of the video. Those were 10 hot takes I had in my mind. What'd you all think? Did I spark any controversy with you? Or were there some you agreed with? Let me know in the comments below. Just try to be civil. We're all human at the end of the day. As for next time, we got the next era of the year covering Stellar Blade, aka the game that should have won Game of the Year in 2024. I'm really happy that this won the poll for which one-off Sony game I should cover, because now I get to gush about how much I love it, as well as deliver a couple critiques where necessary. I hope you look forward to that, because it might contain a surprise or two. See you next time, everybody!